The conference room on Harmony Point Station felt cold to Princess Calvara, though she knew the temperature was standard for all diplomatic meetings. Across the long table sat the humans, looking smaller than most species in the room but somehow taking up more space than their bodies should allow. She watched them carefully with her golden eyes. All four of her hands folded neatly in her lap as her father and the other council leaders delivered their ultimatum. The human ambassador, a woman named Lydia Grant with silver hair and sharp eyes, listened without expression as the Zenthari Emperor spoke. Humanity would accept limits on their expansion. Humanity would restrict their military forces. Humanity would allow council observers in their space, or humanity would face the combined might of 12 species who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years before humans even learned to build spacecraft. Calvara had studied humans for months in preparation for this meeting. She knew they were dangerous. Every species knew it. Humans had gone from primitive planet-bound creatures to interstellar powers in less than 2 centuries. They expanded faster than anyone thought possible. They built weapons that made council military analysts nervous. They had strange ideas about honor and duty that led them to do unpredictable things. The council was right to be worried, but Ambassador Grant did not look worried. She looked calm. When the Emperor finished speaking, she stood and thanked him for his clarity. Then she made a counter-proposal that shocked everyone in the room. Instead of accepting the restrictions, humanity offered an ancient solution. A marriage alliance. A binding of 2 peoples through the union of important individuals from each side. Calvara felt her father's shock through the bond they shared. Marriage alliances were old practice among council species, used centuries ago but rarely now. The human ambassador explained that Princess Calvara, the Emperor's eldest daughter and a respected scientist, would marry a high-ranking human officer. This marriage would prove humanity's commitment to peace. It would create a living bridge between their peoples. It would give the council direct insight into human culture through someone they trusted. The debate lasted 3 hours. Some council members called it primitive, others called it risky, but slowly the tide turned. A marriage alliance meant no immediate confrontation. It gave them time to understand humans better. It placed a trusted observer directly in human space. And if humans violated the peace, well, a marriage could always end. Calvara volunteered before her father could refuse on her behalf. She was a scientist. She wanted to understand the puzzle that humans represented. She was also the Emperor's daughter, trained from birth in duty and sacrifice. If this marriage prevented war and saved lives, then it was the logical choice. Her father looked at her for a long moment, his violet skin pale with concern, but he nodded. The council voted. The agreement was made. The human who walked into the preparation room 2 days later was not what Calvara expected. Captain Jake Morrison stood barely 6 feet tall, average for a human but small compared to her 7-foot frame. He had brown hair kept short in military style, gray eyes that seemed to see everything, and a calm way of moving that reminded her of veteran soldiers from any species. He wore his dress uniform with ease, and when he saw her, he smiled. Not the formal diplomatic smile she was used to, but something genuine. They spoke for an hour before the ceremony, getting to know the person they would be bound to. Jake told her about growing up on Earth, about joining the Navy, about losing friends in the border skirmishes when humans first encountered hostile species. He spoke plainly without trying to impress her or hide difficult truths. When she asked why he volunteered for this marriage, he said it simply. War was coming if someone did not step forward. He had already lost friends to violence. He refused to let more people die if he could prevent it. Calvara found his honesty refreshing. She explained her own reasons just as plainly. She wanted to understand humans because they confused her scientific mind. They did not behave like any other species. They seemed to lack proper threat assessment. They formed emotional bonds too quickly. They took risks that made no logical sense. She wanted to know why. Jake laughed at that, a warm sound that surprised her. He said she would figure it out eventually. Humans confuse themselves half the time. Maybe an outside perspective would see things they missed. The way he said it made her think he was not worried about being studied. He seemed open to it, curious even about what she would discover. The wedding ceremony combined traditions from both cultures. Calvara wore formal robes in Zenthari royal colors, deep purple with silver threading. Jake wore his dress uniform with medals he had earned in combat. They spoke vows in both languages. promises of partnership and respect. When the ceremony ended, they were married according to the laws of both peoples. The council representatives looked satisfied. The human delegation looked hopeful. Calvara looked at her new husband and wondered what she had gotten herself into. Their new home was the CNS Pathfinder, a human diplomatic cruiser that would serve as a mobile embassy. The ship was smaller than Zenthari vessels but built with human efficiency. Every space served multiple purposes. The crew moved through narrow corridors with practiced ease. Calvara had to duck through doorways built for shorter species, but she found the ship oddly comfortable despite its size. Her quarters, now their quarters, had been modified to accommodate her needs. Higher ceilings, a larger bed, furniture that fit her frame. Jake gave her a tour, pointing out features with genuine pride in his ship. He showed her his collection of books, actual paper books from Earth. He showed her the small kitchen area where he sometimes cooked meals himself instead of eating in the mess hall. He was trying to make her feel welcome, she realized. Trying to make this arranged marriage feel less cold. That first night, they sat together in the observation room, watching stars stream past as the Pathfinder traveled to its first diplomatic assignment. Calvara activated her personal recording device and began her official report to the council. She described the ceremony, the ship, her first impressions of Captain Morrison. She noted that humans seemed more relaxed than expected, less militaristic in their daily behavior than council intelligence suggested. She recommended continued observation. But in her private log, the one only she would read, Calvara wrote something different. She wrote that Jake Morrison was not what she expected. He was kind without being weak. He was military trained but not harsh. He looked at her like she was a person, not a political arrangement or an alien curiosity. She wrote that she did not know yet if humans were truly dangerous, but she was starting to think that the council might be afraid of the wrong things. 3 days into their marriage, a minor crisis tested her first impressions. An oxygen recycler failed in one of the ship's sections. Alarms blared through the corridors. Calvara expected panic, evacuation procedures, emergency protocols. Instead, she watched the human crew respond with calm efficiency. They joked with each other as they worked. They moved quickly but without fear. Within 20 minutes, they had the problem isolated and backup systems engaged. Within an hour, the primary system was repaired. Jake found her in the corridor afterward, still processing what she had seen. She asked him why no one seemed afraid. Equipment failures in space were serious. People could die. He shrugged and said yes, they could die. But worrying about it did not fix the problem. The crew trained for emergencies. When emergencies happened, they did their jobs. Fear was normal, but they acted anyway. That was just how humans worked. Calvara added this observation to her report. Humans appeared to have an unusual relationship with danger. They acknowledged it but did not let it control their actions. This might explain their rapid expansion. Species that avoided risk would never push boundaries the way humans did. It was fascinating from a scientific perspective. It was also deeply troubling. A species that did not properly fear danger could be very dangerous indeed to others. Over the following weeks, Calvara settled into a routine. She observed the crew. She recorded data. She asked Jake endless questions about human psychology, human history, human culture. He answered everything honestly, sometimes with amusement at her confusion, but never with impatience. He asked her questions, too, about Zenthari science, about council politics, about what it was like to have 4 arms. Their conversations became the best part of her day. She also noticed that the crew treated her differently than she expected. They did not see her as a spy or a political hostage. They saw her as their captain's wife and gradually as one of them. Engineers explained their work when she showed interest. The medical officer invited her to observe human physiology studies. Security personnel asked her to teach them about Zenthari martial arts. They were integrating her into their community without hesitation or suspicion. One evening, Jake made dinner in their quarters. Nothing fancy, just pasta with vegetables. But he had researched Zenthari nutritional needs and adapted the recipe to be safe for her. They ate together while he told her stories about growing up on Earth. He described a world that tried to kill humans constantly. Dangerous weather, poisonous plants, predatory animals, diseases, natural disasters. Humans survived by being stubborn, he say. 3 months into her marriage, Calvara stood on the observation deck of New Haven Colony. and watched human miners work alongside 3 other species. The colony sat on a mineral-rich moon, and the mixed crews operated massive drilling equipment that pulled precious metals from deep underground. What caught her attention was not the work itself, but how the workers interacted. A human named Danny Carter worked next to a Krathani named Vesh, a species known for their solitary nature and difficulty forming social bonds. But Danny and Vesh moved in perfect coordination, anticipating each other's needs without speaking. During their break, they sat together sharing food and laughing at some joke Calvara could not hear from this distance. She had never seen a Krathani laugh before. She made a note to interview them later. The interviews revealed something that troubled and fascinated her in equal measure. Every alien worker she spoke to described similar experiences. Humans welcomed them immediately. Humans learned their names, their customs, their preferences. Humans invited them to social gatherings. Humans defended them when disputes arose with other species. One Metherian engineer, a species that usually kept strictly to their own kind, told Calvara that humans made her feel safe for the first time since leaving her homeworld. She had human friends now, real friends who cared about her well-being. Calvara added this to her growing data. Humans seemed to export their pack-bonding behavior to other species. They treated aliens not as foreigners, but as potential members of their community. This explained why human colonies always had diverse populations. It also explained why those populations remained stable and productive. Humans created environments where others felt included and protected. From a sociological perspective, it was remarkable. From a strategic perspective, it was deeply concerning. A species that could turn anyone into allies would be very difficult to isolate or contain. The next stop on their diplomatic tour was Research Station Kepler, a human facility studying exotic matter and its applications for faster-than-light travel. Jake warned her that scientists could be intense about their work, but she was a scientist herself. She understood passion for knowledge. What she was not prepared for was human scientific culture in action. The lead researcher, Dr. Patricia Wells, was explaining their latest experiment when alarms started blaring throughout the station. The containment field around their exotic matter sample was failing. Calvara's training kicked in immediately. Failed containment meant evacuation. Exotic matter was dangerous. They needed to get everyone to safety and seal the section. She turned to tell the humans to evacuate and found them running toward the danger instead of away from it. Dr. Wells was shouting orders. 3 scientists sprinted to the reactor controls. 2 more headed for the containment chamber itself, pulling on radiation suits as they ran. Another team was setting up backup power systems. Jake moved with them, his military training evident in how he coordinated their efforts. No one was leaving. Everyone was working to save the experiment, the station, and each other. Calvara watched through the observation window as 2 scientists entered the containment chamber. The radiation levels were climbing into dangerous territory. They should not be in there, but they were manually stabilizing the field generators, working with tools while exposed to radiation that would make them sick. She wanted to stop them, to tell them their lives were worth more than the experiment. But she could also see that if they did not stabilize those generators, the containment would fail completely, and the resulting explosion would destroy the entire station. It took 11 minutes that felt like hours. The scientists in the chamber finished their work and stumbled out, radiation burns already visible on their exposed skin. Medical teams rushed them to treatment. The containment field stabilized. The crisis passed, and then the humans started laughing. Not hysterical panic laughter, but genuine amusement. Someone made a joke about hazard pay. Someone else complained that they would miss dinner in the mess. Dr. Wells thanked her team for quick thinking and suggested they celebrate. After medical cleared the injured, researchers, Calvara found herself shaking, all 4 hands trembling with adrenaline she had not realized she was producing. Jake noticed and guided her to a quiet corner. He explained calmly that yes, it was dangerous. Yes, people could have died, but the team trained for exactly these situations. They knew the risks. They accepted them because the research was important, and because protecting the station meant protecting everyone on it. Fear was natural, he said, but they acted despite fear because that was the job. That was what humans did. She asked him if he was afraid during the crisis. He admitted he was terrified. But being afraid and doing nothing meant letting people die, so he pushed the fear aside and did what needed doing. He said it matter-of-factly, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And she realized that to him, to all humans, it probably was obvious. They simply did not have the option of surrender built into their psychology. When faced with danger, their instinct was to fight it, fix it, or die trying. That night, back aboard the Pathfinder, Jake found her in their quarters staring at her datapad. He asked if she was okay. She admitted she was not sure. Everything she was learning about humans challenged her understanding of how intelligent species should behave. Humans were reckless. They took insane risks. They ignored probability calculations that should make them cautious. But they survived anyway. More than survived, they thrived. And they brought other species along with them. Jake sat beside her and offered a different perspective. Humans learned early that caution could mean death. Their evolution happened on a planet that did not forgive hesitation. Predators did not wait for prey to make safe choices. Diseases did not pause for careful planning. Natural disasters struck without warning. So humans adapted by becoming decision-makers. They assessed threats quickly and acted immediately. Sometimes they were wrong and paid the price. But more often, acting fast meant survival while thinking too long meant death. He pulled up Earth's historical database on his own pad and showed her records. Plagues that killed millions. Wars that destroyed civilizations. Famines, floods, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions. Humanity faced extinction dozens of times. They survived by cooperating, by innovating, by refusing to give up. Each crisis taught them that working together was better than isolation. Each disaster proved that protecting the community was worth individual risk. These lessons shaped human culture over thousands of years. Calvara read through the records, fascinated and horrified. The Xanthari had a much gentler evolutionary history. Her species evolved on a stable world with predictable dangers and abundant resources. They learned caution because caution worked. They developed logic and careful planning because those strategies led to success. They avoided unnecessary risks because risks were unnecessary. But humans learned the opposite lessons. For humans, caution meant death and boldness meant survival. No wonder they seemed so alien to other species. They came from circumstances that most galactic species would consider impossible to survive. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened in ways Calvara had not anticipated. Jake introduced her to human art and music. He showed her paintings that captured emotion in color and form. He played her symphonies that made her want to weep without understanding why. He read her poetry that spoke about love and loss and hope in ways that transcended species. Humans, she discovered, felt things deeply and expressed those feelings through creation. Other species had art, but human art seemed more raw, more honest, more desperately alive. She found herself sharing Xanthari culture with him in return. She taught him meditation techniques that helped focus the mind. She showed him Xanthari mathematical proofs that bordered on philosophical. She explained the complex honor systems that governed her people's social interactions. Jake absorbed it all with genuine interest. He asked questions. He made connections between Xanthari and human concepts. He treated her culture with the same respect he showed to her personally. And somewhere in those exchanges, the diplomatic marriage stopped feeling like duty and started feeling like partnership. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings with colonial administrators, they sat together in the observation room watching stars. Calvara admitted that she was starting to understand why the galaxy feared humans, but not for the reasons the Council believed. The Council thought humans were dangerous because they were aggressive and militaristic, but that was not it at all. Humans were dangerous because they made you care about them. They drew you in with kindness and loyalty and genuine interest in your well-being. And once you cared about humans, you started adopting their perspective. You started seeing problems as solvable. You started believing that bold action was better than safe inaction. You started wanting to protect others the way humans protected others. Jake listened to her theory with a small smile. He asked if she felt that way about him specifically or about humans in general. Calvara hesitated before answering honestly. Both. She cared about the humans on this ship because they had welcomed her. She cared about the human colonists she met because they were building something good. But yes, she cared. The distress call came through at 0400 hours ship time, tearing Calvara from sleep. Jake was already moving, pulling on his uniform with the practiced speed of someone who had done this countless times. The Horizon's Hope, a civilian transport carrying 847 passengers, was under attack by Krill raiders in the Outer Reach. The ship's engines were damaged. Life support was failing. They had maybe 4 hours before everyone aboard died. Calvara followed Jake to the bridge, her mind already calculating distances and response times. The Pathfinder was the closest ship, but they were still 90 minutes away at maximum speed. Military vessels with proper weapons were 3 hours out. She ran the numbers 3 times, hoping she made an error, but the math was clear. If the Pathfinder did not respond, hundreds of people would die before help arrived. But the Pathfinder was a diplomatic vessel with minimal armaments facing 3 krill warships that outgunned them badly. Jake reached the bridge and immediately ordered maximum acceleration toward the transport. The crew responded without hesitation, their efficiency remarkable even to Calvara, who had been watching them for months. But she felt compelled to speak. She approached Jake at his command station and kept her voice low, trying to give him a chance to reconsider without undermining his authority in front of the crew. She told him what he already knew. They were outgunned. Military doctrine from every species in the council said the correct response was to transmit the location to proper combat vessels and withdraw to a safe distance. The Pathfinder carried diplomatic personnel, scientists, and civilians. Risking this ship for a rescue that might fail was not logical. He should reconsider. Jake looked at her with those calm gray eyes that she had learned to read. He was not angry at her suggestion. He simply disagreed. He told her quietly that 847 people were going to die if someone did not help them now. The Pathfinder could reach them in time to make a difference. That meant they were going. Military doctrine was useful, but doctrine did not override the basic requirement to help people in danger when you could reach them. He asked if she understood. She did not, but she nodded anyway. The next 90 minutes were the longest of Calvara's life. The crew prepared for combat with grim determination. Engineers boosted power to weapons that were never meant for ship-to-ship combat. Medical teams set up emergency triage stations. Security personnel broke out weapons lockers. Everyone knew the odds. Everyone prepared anyway. Calvara watched them work and finally understood what she had been observing for months. Humans did not calculate acceptable losses the way other species did. They calculated how to save everyone and accepted that they might die trying. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel to find chaos. The Horizon's hope was tumbling slowly, venting atmosphere from multiple hull breaches. 3 krill warships circled it like predators, firing periodically to disable escape pods and prevent rescue attempts. They were not trying to destroy the transport yet. They were keeping it alive to lure other ships into a trap. The Pathfinder's arrival made them turn with interest. What happened next violated every principle of proper military engagement that Calvara had ever studied. Jake opened communications on diplomatic channels, identifying the Pathfinder as a neutral embassy vessel requesting safe passage to provide humanitarian aid. The krill commander, either amused or curious, allowed them to approach, and Jake used that permission to close to point-blank range before the Pathfinder's weapons suddenly came online and fired directly into the nearest krill ship's reactor. The krill ship exploded. The other 2 immediately opened fire, and the battle became something Calvara could barely follow. The Pathfinder was not built for this kind of combat, but Jake flew it like a fighter, using the burning wreckage of the first krill ship as cover. He coordinated with the damaged transport, using its failing reactor as bait to draw 1 krill ship into a trap. Human crew members did things that should be impossible, like manually venting atmosphere to create improvised countermeasures or rerouting power systems on the fly to boost shields for critical seconds. Through it all, the crew never panicked. They responded to orders instantly. They compensated for damage without being told. They made split-second decisions that required trust in each other and their captain. And they kept talking. Short bursts of communication that somehow included jokes. Someone made a comment about hazard pay. Someone else complained about missing breakfast. It was insane. It was terrifying. And it was working. The second krill ship went down when Jake used the transport's dying reactor as a weapon, timing an explosion to catch the krill vessel as it moved in for a kill shot. But the third ship was smarter and more cautious. It stayed at range and pounded the Pathfinder with weapons fire. Shields were failing. Hull breaches appeared throughout the ship. Casualties mounted. And still Jake kept fighting, kept protecting the transport, kept giving orders in that calm voice that never wavered. Then Jake made a decision that stopped Calvara's heart. He ordered the Pathfinder to move between the transport and the krill ship, using their own vessel as a shield. They took fire meant to destroy the Horizon's hope. Armor plating buckled. Systems failed. People died. But the transport was protected. And in that moment, Calvara understood exactly what the galaxy feared about humans. They were willing to die for strangers, not because of orders or obligation, but because protecting others was more important than their own survival. It was not just bravery. It was something deeper, something fundamental to what humans were. Jake ordered fighters launched. The Pathfinder only carried 3 small defensive craft, meant for patrol work, not combat. But they launched anyway. Jake took one himself. Calvara wanted to stop him, wanted to order him to stay on the bridge where commanders belonged. But she had no authority here. She could only watch as he flew directly at the Krill warship, his small fighter drawing fire away from the crippled Pathfinder and the helpless transport. She listened to his voice on the communications channel. Calm and steady as he executed maneuvers that should be impossible, he flew through weapons fire like he was dancing. He coordinated with the other 2 fighters, setting up attack runs that targeted specific systems on the Krill ship. He pushed his fighter beyond safe limits using every trick he had learned in years of combat experience. And when the Krill ship's shields finally collapsed, he led the killing strike that destroyed its main reactor. The 3rd Krill ship broke apart and died. The battle ended. Human military vessels finally arrived. 3 hours too late to help, but in time to secure the area. Medical teams rushed to both the Pathfinder and the Horizon's Hope. Damage control crews began emergency repairs. And Calvara stood on the bridge, shaking from adrenaline and relief and terror that was only now hitting her. She found Jake in the fighter bay 20 minutes later. His fighter was heavily damaged, scorched from weapons fire and leaking fuel. He was climbing out of the cockpit with help from deck crew, blood running down the side of his face from a head wound. When he saw her, he smiled that impossible human smile and apologized for worrying her. Apologized, like he had not just done something insane, like he had not almost died protecting people he never met. Calvara pushed past the deck crew and grabbed him with all 4 arms, holding him tight enough that he made a small sound of pain. She did not care. She needed to feel that he was solid, real, alive. She had watched him fly into certain death. She had been preparing herself to lose him, and he was apologizing for worrying her like it was nothing. He tried to pull away, saying he needed to check on the injured crew members first. She held him tighter and told him no. Medical personnel could handle the injured. He was injured. He needed treatment. And she needed him to stop trying to save everyone else for 5 minutes and let her take care of him. He looked surprised, then nodded and let her lead him to medical. The medical officer cleaned his wounds while Calvara held his hand. The head injury looked worse than it was. Superficial cuts, mild concussion, nothing serious. Jake would be fine in a day or 2. The medical officer left them alone after finishing treatment. And Calvara finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the battle started. Why did he risk his life, risk his crew, risk his ship for strangers? Why could he not follow the logical response and wait for military vessels? Why did humans always choose the dangerous path when safer options existed? She needed to understand because it made no sense to her scientific mind. Jake was quiet for a long moment before answering. He told her about the border skirmishes years ago, about being a junior officer on a ship that received a distress call from a colony under attack, about his captain making the same choice he just made, responding immediately instead of waiting for reinforcements, about arriving in time to save most of the colonists because someone chose to act instead of being cautious, about his captain dying in that battle along with half the crew, about the survivors, including Jake, carrying on because that was what the captain would want. The captain taught him that sometimes the only moral choice was the dangerous one, that protecting others meant risking yourself. That was what being human meant, Calvara understood then. This was not about logic or military doctrine. This was about human values that went deeper than reason. The emergency summons arrived 3 weeks after the battle. The Galactic Council demanded Calvara and Jake return to Harmony Point immediately. The Krill Collective had launched a massive offensive across Council space, attacking 6 colonies simultaneously. The Council was facing its greatest military crisis in 3 centuries. And they wanted answers about human military capabilities now, not later. The journey back to Harmony Point took 4 days. Calvara spent that time preparing reports and bracing herself for difficult conversations. Her father would be angry about her declared loyalty to humans. The Council would be suspicious of her recommendations. and the hardliners who wanted to eliminate the human threat would use this crisis as justification for aggressive action. She was walking into a political firestorm with her marriage and possibly the future of human-council relations hanging in the balance. Jake spent the time in strategy meetings with Ambassador Grant and military advisors. They were preparing humanity's offer to help defend council space. It was a calculated risk. Committing human forces to fight the Krill would prove humanity's value as an ally, but it would also reveal human military capabilities completely, giving the Council detailed knowledge of human strengths and weaknesses. If the Council chose to turn on humanity after the crisis, humans would be vulnerable. Grant argued they had no choice. The Council needed help. Humanity could provide it, and maybe, just maybe, fighting together would build trust that political negotiations never could. Harmony Point Station was chaos when they arrived. Warships from a dozen species crowded the docks. Diplomatic delegations rushed through corridors. News broadcasts showed the devastation the Krill were causing. Millions of civilians were fleeing advancing Krill forces. Council military units were falling back on multiple fronts. The defensive strategy that worked for centuries against smaller threats was collapsing against a coordinated offensive by a peer military. Power Calvara's father summoned her before the full council meeting. Emperor Velthon looked older than she remembered, stress adding years to his features. They met in private quarters assigned to the Zenthari delegation. He dismissed his guards and advisors, leaving them alone for the first time since her wedding day. And he asked her directly if she had become a traitor to her people. The accusation hurt, but Calvara kept her voice steady. She told her father that she remained loyal to the Zenthari Empire and to him personally, but she had also developed loyalty to humans because she understood them now. She had lived among them. She had watched them face danger. She had seen their values in action. Humans were not the threat the Council imagined. They were potential allies who shared Council values of protecting the innocent and opposing aggression. Her loyalty expanded to include humans. It did not replace her original loyalties. Her father was not convinced. He pointed out that Council intelligence indicated humans were preparing for war. They were building ships faster than any species in galactic history. They were fortifying their borders. They were developing weapons that Council analysts found concerning. Everything suggested humans were preparing to expand aggressively once they felt strong enough. The Council had been right to fear them. Calvara countered with her own observations. Yes, humans built military forces quickly, but they built them in response to threats, not to create threats. Humans experienced hostile first contact with several species before meeting the Council. They learned that the galaxy was dangerous and they needed strength to survive. But human expansion was not conquest. Humans colonized empty systems and welcomed other species to join them. Human military doctrine was defensive at its core. They fought to protect, not to conquer. The Council's fear was creating the very threat they worried about by forcing humans to prepare for war with the Council itself. Her father listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he told her something that made her blood run cold. Hardliners in the Council were proposing to use the Krill crisis as cover to eliminate humanity, while human forces were committed elsewhere. If humans sent their fleet to defend Council space, their home systems would be vulnerable. A strike force could destroy human shipyards and military infrastructure before humans could respond. The threat would be eliminated permanently, and it would look like the Krill did it. Calvara felt sick. She asked if her father supported this plan. He admitted he was considering it. The crisis proved that the Council's military was inadequate. Humans were strong and getting stronger. Better to act now than wait until humans could challenge Council supremacy. It was cold logic, the kind of strategic thinking that Zenthari were famous for. Eliminate threats before they become unmanageable. She looked at her father and spoke with all the conviction she had developed over 9 months of marriage. If the Council did that, they would prove humans right to fear and prepare against them. They would also lose the best potential ally they ever had. Humans were not like the Krill. Humans did not want to conquer the galaxy. They wanted to be part of it. They wanted friendship and cooperation. And most importantly, humans were exactly what the Council needed. They were brave where the Council had become cautious. They were innovative where the Council had become rigid. They protected others where the Council protected only itself. The galaxy needed humanity's strength and humanity's heart. Destroying them would be the greatest strategic mistake the Council ever made. Her father dismissed her without committing to either side. The full council meeting would decide, and that meeting began 2 hours later in the massive chamber, where representatives from 12 species gathered to determine the fate of billions. Calvara sat with the Zenthari delegation, watching Jake and Ambassador Grant enter from the human side. They looked calm, professional, prepared. They had no idea that some council members were planning betrayal. Ambassador Grant presented humanity's offer. Human forces would commit to defending council space against the Krill. Human military advisors would coordinate with council commanders. Human resources would support refugee efforts and humanitarian aid. In exchange, humanity requested formal alliance status and recognition as equals in the galactic community. The containment protocols would end. Humans would have full access to council technology, trade networks, and diplomatic forums. They would become partners, not subjects. The debate was fierce. Some species argued that accepting meant acknowledging they needed help from a species they had been trying to contain. Others worried that giving humans equal status would shift the balance of power in ways they could not predict. The hardliners argued openly for rejection, suggesting that the council could handle the Krill without human help if they committed fully. And a few, mostly younger representatives from species who had positive interactions with humans, argued passionately for acceptance. Then something unprecedented happened. Calvara invoked an ancient Zenthari tradition that allowed royal family members to speak as independent witnesses before the council. It was rarely used, considered archaic by most. But the rules still existed, and her father could not stop her without creating a scandal. She stood and walked to the speaker's platform, aware of every eye in the chamber following her movement. She spoke for 20 minutes, describing everything she had learned about humans. She described their capacity for friendship across species lines. She described their courage in the face of danger. She described their tactical innovation and their unwillingness to surrender. She described watching human scientists risk death to save a research station. She described watching human crew members die protecting a transport full of strangers. She described her husband flying into near-certain death because protecting others was more important than his own survival. She told the council that she understood their fear. Humans were different. Humans were unpredictable. Humans did things that made no logical sense by council standards, but that was exactly why the galaxy needed them. The council had become comfortable with peace purchased through caution and isolation. Humans reminded the galaxy that some things were worth fighting for, some people were worth protecting, some risks were worth taking. Humans represented values the council had forgotten in millennia of careful diplomacy. She admitted that she loved her human husband. She admitted that love changed her perspective, but she argued that was the point. Humans made you care about them. They drew you in with genuine kindness and loyalty, and once you cared about humans, you saw the galaxy through their eyes. You saw problems as solvable rather than inevitable. You saw strangers as potential friends rather than threats. You saw cooperation as strength rather than weakness. That was humanity's real power, not their weapons or their ships. They changed how you thought. They changed who you were. They made you better. The council was silent when she finished. Then the voting began. Each species cast their vote with brief explanations. Some voted for alliance, citing positive experiences with human colonies. Some voted against, citing concerns about human military growth. Some abstained, unwilling to commit either way. The votes were counted. The numbers were close. Too close. It came down to a single deciding vote. Emperor Velthon stood to cast the Zenthari vote, the most influential voice in the council. Calvara held her breath. Her father. The Battle of Thresh began badly for the Allied forces. Intelligence had underestimated the Krill fleet by 40%. What should have been an even fight turned into a desperate defense against superior numbers. Council ships executed their standard defensive doctrine, forming tight formations and falling back to prepared positions. They fought well by their standards, disciplined and coordinated, but they were losing ground steadily against the Krill's relentless aggression. Calvara watched from the bridge of the CNS Defiant, Admiral Connor Hayes's flagship. She served as liaison between human and council forces, translating not just language but military culture between species with very different approaches to warfare. She had thought she understood human military doctrine after months of observation, but watching it in action on this scale was something else entirely. It was beautiful, and terrifying in equal measure. The human fleet did not fall back. They advanced directly into the Krill formation, weapons blazing, moving with coordination that seemed impossible. Council officers monitoring the battle gasped as human ships executed maneuvers that should result in collisions, but somehow threaded through gaps that barely existed. Human tactical doctrine was not about preserving forces. It was about creating chaos in enemy formations and exploiting opportunities that appeared for only seconds. It was controlled insanity, and it was working, but working was not winning. The Krill fleet was too large. The human forces were taking heavy casualties. Ships were crippled. Escape pods dotted the battlefield. And the Krill kept coming, wave after wave of warships that seemed endless. Calvara watched the tactical displays and calculated probable outcomes. The math was not good. Even with human tactical superiority, numbers would eventually decide this battle. And the Krill had the numbers. Then the Krill broke through the Allied defensive line. A strike force of 20 ships punched through a weak point in council formations and turned toward the Emperor's will, the massive Xanthari dreadnought carrying her father and the council high command. If that ship fell, the alliance would collapse. Council species would panic, coordination would fail, the battle would become a rout. Jake Morrison commanded a squadron of human destroyers on the fleet's edge. Calvara watched his tactical marker on the display, always aware of where he was in the chaos. And she watched that marker suddenly change course, his squadron breaking formation to intercept the Krill strike force. It was suicide. 6 destroyers against 20 Krill warships. The math was clear. Jake and his people would die. She opened a direct channel to his ship, her voice cutting through the battle chatter. She asked him what he was doing. He told her calmly that the Emperor's will could not maneuver quickly enough to evade. Someone had to slow the Krill strike force. His squadron was positioned correctly. They were going in. He told her he loved her. Then he cut the channel and led his ships into combat. Calvara felt something break inside her chest. She was about to watch her husband die protecting her father. She wanted to scream at him to pull back, to save himself, to let someone else make the sacrifice. But she knew him well enough to know he would never do that. This was who Jake Morrison was. This was who all humans were when others needed protection. They gave everything, even their lives, without hesitation or regret. Jake's squadron hit the Krill strike force like a hammer. They fired everything they had, targeting engines and weapon systems, trying to cripple as many ships as possible. The Krill responded with overwhelming firepower. Human destroyers took hit after hit, armor buckling, shields collapsing. Jake's ship was in the center of the formation, taking the worst of the fire. Calvara watched his ship's status indicators turn red one by one. Life support failing, weapons offline, engines damaged. Still he fought. But Jake's sacrifice bought time. The Krill strike force was slowed, their formation disrupted. And in that moment of respite, something unexpected happened. Council ships that had been retreating turned back. Xanthari cruisers, Krathani frigates, Matharian destroyers, species that normally competed rather than cooperated, all turned back to protect the human squadron that was protecting them. They poured fire into the Krill, coordinating their attacks in ways council forces never managed before. Calvara realized what she was seeing. Humans were contagious. Their courage spread to others. Council crews watched humans sacrifice themselves to protect council ships and felt compelled to return that protection. The defensive doctrine that council species followed for centuries was breaking down. They were learning to fight like humans, taking risks to save each other, acting on instinct instead of protocol. The transformation was spreading through the fleet in real time. Admiral Hayes saw it too. He immediately revised his orders, coordinating council and human forces into integrated strike groups. Human ships provided aggressive offensive action, while council ships provided supporting fire and defense. The combination was devastating. What neither force could do alone, they accomplished together. The Krill advance stalled, then reversed. The Allied fleet was winning, but Calvara barely noticed the larger battle. Her attention was locked on Jake's destroyer, tumbling through space with main power offline. He was still alive. She could see his biosigns on the medical status board. But his ship was crippled and venting atmosphere. If she did not get to him soon, he would die regardless of medical status. She turned to Admiral Hayes and requested permission to take a shuttle. Hayes looked at her for one moment, then nodded. He told her to go get her husband. The fleet could manage without its liaison officer for a few minutes. Calvara ran through the Defiance corridors, her long legs covering ground quickly. She reached the shuttle bay and took manual control of a rescue shuttle, overriding safety protocols that would normally prevent launch during combat. She had watched humans ignore safety protocols for months. Time to learn from their example. The flight to Jake's destroyer was the most terrifying experience of her life. She dodged debris, evaded weapons fire, threaded through the chaos of battle with reflexes she did not know she had. Fear tried to paralyze her. She pushed it down the way she had seen humans do. Fear could wait. Jake needed help now. She reached the crippled destroyer and docked with its emergency airlock. Inside the destroyer was chaos. Emergency lighting flickered. Smoke-filled corridors. Injured crew members were being evacuated. And there was Jake, coordinating the evacuation despite blood running down his face from new injuries. When he saw her, his eyes went wide with shock. He demanded to know what she was doing here. This was a combat zone. She should be safely aboard the Defiant. She told him to shut up and get on her shuttle. They could argue about proper safety protocols later. They loaded wounded crew members onto the shuttle until it was packed beyond capacity. Jake insisted on being last aboard, making sure everyone else was safe first. Calvara wanted to drag him onto the shuttle by force, but she knew he would resist. So she worked with him, helping evacuate his people, until the destroyer was empty, except for the two of them. Only then would he leave his ship. The flight back to the Defiant gave them a chance to see the full scope of the battle. The Krill fleet was breaking. Council and human forces were pushing them back on all fronts. Ships that had never fought together before were operating like they had trained together for years. The alliance was working, not just politically but tactically. Two different military traditions were merging into something new and more effective than either alone. By the time they reached the Defiant, the battle was effectively over. The Krill fleet was in full retreat, leaving behind crippled ships and escape pods. The Allied fleet had won, though the cost was high. Hundreds of ships damaged, thousands of casualties. But they had stopped the Krill offensive, and more importantly, they had proven that humans and Council species could fight together. The alliance was no longer just words, it was real, forged in combat and sealed with shared sacrifice. Medical teams met them when they docked. Jake needed serious treatment this time. Broken ribs, concussion, internal bleeding. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but he would be recovering for weeks. Calvara stayed with him through the initial treatment, holding his hand while doctors worked. He kept apologizing for worrying her. She kept telling him to stop apologizing and focus on healing. Eventually, the medication knocked him unconscious, and she could finally let herself cry. Her father found her in the medical bay hours later. Emperor Velthon looked exhausted but uninjured. The Emperor's will had survived thanks to Jake's sacrifice. He sat beside Calvara and asked about her husband's condition. She told him Jake would recover. Her father nodded and was quiet for a long moment before speaking again. He told her that he understood now what she tried to explain. He watched human crews die protecting his ship. He watched Council crews respond by protecting the humans in return. He saw two very different military cultures merge into something greater than either alone. She was right about humans. They were not threats. They were exactly what the galaxy needed. Teachers of forgotten virtues. Reminders that some things were worth fighting for. Partners who would stand beside you in any crisis. Calvara felt relief flood through her. Her father's support meant the alliance.